Welcome to this podcast of the Florida Historical Quarterly. My name is Daniel Murphy and I am Assistant Editor of the Journal. If you are new to these podcasts, please visit the Florida Historical Quarterly on Facebook, where you can now access abstracts of each article in the current issue of the Journal. In 2014, the FHQ will continue publishing a series of 6 special issues in recognition of the quincentennial of Ponce de Leon's first visit to Florida in 1513. Next year's special issue is dedicated to Florida history during the 17th century and will be guest edited by Jane Landers. Please look forward to publication of the issue in early 2014. Today's podcast features an interview with Mr. Richard Dellinger. Richard helped create the fall 2013 FHQ special issue on the history of the United States Court for the Middle District of Florida. This special issue, which includes the work of 26 authors, was developed in collaboration with the Historical Society of the United States District Court for the Middle District of Florida in celebration of the court's 50th anniversary. In today's interview, Richard and I discuss the content of the special issue and the court's significance to Florida history overall. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. My name is Richard Dellinger. I am an attorney in Orlando, Florida. I work with the law firm of Lowndes, Drozdick, Doster, Cantor, and Reed. I'm a partner in that law firm. I've been a practicing attorney for approximately 15 years. I'm the former president of the Federal Bar Association Orlando chapter. I also am a current member of the Middle District of Florida Historical Committee.
The fall 2013 issue of the Florida Historical Quarterly is devoted to a brief history of the Middle District Court of Florida. Can you briefly describe the Middle District Court of Florida and its purpose?
Sure. The Constitution established a single Supreme Court and then gave Congress the power to create lower courts as appropriate. In the end, Congress set up the lower courts as their trial courts and then set up courts of appeals. Today there are 12 regional courts of appeals, the 1st through the 11th Circuit and the D.C. Circuit, and there are 94 judicial circuits. Florida is within the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, and Florida is divided into 3 different judicial circuits today. Up until 1962, Florida was just the Northern and the Southern District. Today we have a Middle District, which runs from Jacksonville and the north all the way across the state over to Tampa and south down to Fort Myers. As of 1950, the population in Florida, the population in the Southern District of Florida was 3 million, and 10 years later, the population had exploded up to 5 million, nearly double. As a result of the population explosion and additional growth within populous areas in Central Florida, including Jacksonville, Tampa, and Orlando, the Middle District was established, and the Middle District was taken from parts of the Northern and the Southern Districts. The Congress passed a statute establishing the Middle District on July 30, 1962, and that statute took effect on October 30, 1962. So as of October 30, 2012, the Middle District of Florida celebrated its 50th year serving this community.
It's quite a history. What are you trying to achieve, or what is the goal of this FHQ special issue on the Middle District Court?
What we are trying to do is preserve our history. The history of the Middle District of Florida has mostly been preserved through the word of mouth. There are a select number of judges who can recall things that have happened in this district, and a select number of attorneys, and obviously the litigants, the parties who had the cases in the court. Those people can remember it, and they have told one another about the cases and about the history, but we really had not had a good historical print for what has happened in this district over the past 50 years. So what we have tried to do is preserve that history. We want to share our history with other lawyers, with other judges, and we really want the public to know how far we have come as a district in the past 50 years. This can be accomplished not only by sharing the cases, but also sharing how it's responded to different issues that the country has been involved in.
On that last note, when I was reading through this volume or this issue, it's very fascinating. A lot of interesting cases. Are there any particular cases or actions of the Middle District Court that have been especially significant in your opinion?
Well, there are several cases that are significant, and remember, the cases that come in front of this court are really just a reflection of the people that are living in this district. This is a reflection of the issues that our communities are dealing with on a regular basis. One area of case law that the federal court was actively involved in for the past 50 years is the segregation and integration cases. As you know, Brown versus Board of Education and Brown versus Board of Education 2, Roman numeral 2, required that all schools be integrated with all deliberate speed. Previous to Brown versus Board of Education, the public schools in Florida and throughout the South and throughout much of the nation were segregated based on race. After Brown 2, the school districts were advised that the school districts need to be integrated. That task of overseeing the integration of the school districts fell on the federal courts. When a school district did not appear to be properly integrated, a lawsuit was filed, typically by the NAACP, by prominent lawyers who later became judges in the Middle District of Florida. Those lawsuits typically said that the school district was not in compliance with Brown versus Board of Education, and then the judges would then ask for a plan for integration of the school. That plan would be submitted to the judge, and then the judge would approve the plan and oversee the integration. For some school districts, this lasts 5-10 years. For other school districts, it lasted 47 years. That's what happened here in Orange County. There were two cases in the segregation and integration era that were of particular interest, and we tried to talk about them in this issue. The first case was Mims versus Duval County School Board. If you grew up in Jacksonville, or if you know Jacksonville history, you know that the Duval County school system was integrated, and that integration was overseen by the court system, and the case was Mims versus Duval County School Board. On the record alone, it appears that the integration took place without any problems whatsoever, that a plan was submitted, that the integration happened peacefully, and that the schools were subsequently integrated, and they are integrated today. But the article analyzes issues such as whether the schools are properly integrated today and whether some of the residents are no longer in the public school system and whether we have achieved Brown versus Board of Education's goals. Judge Hodges, who had taken over a segregation and integration case when he first took the bench more than 40 years ago, talked about a bombing in Jacksonville of a student by the name of Donnell Godfrey. Mr. Godfrey had gone to the Jacksonville school, and the students weren't happy that he was there, and he went home one night in February of 1964. He heard the clock ticking under his house, and his school had been bombed simply because he had gone to a school that was previously segregated. There was another case that we talked about in this issue, Harriet versus Board of Public Instruction. And that case was a Manatee County case, or it was a case out of Bradenton. And this case got national attention when it was being litigated. The school district was not integrated. A lawsuit was filed to integrate the school system. The governor at the time, Governor Claude Kirk, was a fervent segregationist. He opposed busing at any measures. But the school district in Bradenton and Manatee County agreed to integrate the school system. They set up a plan for busing students. They set up a plan to get the schools integrated. And they did that under the oversight of the federal court. Claude Kirk went to the school board, and took over. He went with the state police, took over the school board. That set up a standoff between the governor and the state police and the federal court and the U.S. Marshals. Ultimately, Judge Krinsman found Governor Kirk in contempt of court and said that he needed to show cause why he should not be held in contempt of court. Governor Kirk appeared through a lawyer. He was held in contempt and fined $10,000 per day until the schools could be integrated and he could remove himself from the school board. In the end, Governor Kirk stepped away and he agreed to allow that school to be integrated. Then we have other cases that are of interest. There was a whole line of prison overcrowding cases that began here in the federal courts. A famous case called Costello versus Wainwright came out of the federal courts here in the Middle District of Florida. The state prisons were putting approximately 10,300 inmates in space that was only built for 7,000 inmates. The state prison system wasn't providing care for the mentally ill, and the prisons were overcrowded. A lawsuit was filed in the federal district court claiming that the conditions violated the Eighth Amendment and that they were cruel and unusual. A special master was appointed to oversee the prison system and to address the overcrowding issue. That special master, a professor at the University of Florida, oversaw the overcrowding issue and the lack of care for decades before those overcrowding issues were addressed. This was done through the oversight of the federal court and with the work of our judges here in the Middle District. In this edition, we talk about admiralty cases. Many people will remember the Skyway Bridge collapse and a Greyhound bus that fell off the Skyway Bridge and into the bay, and 27 people who died. We talk about employment cases that were litigated in the Middle District of Florida. There was a case called Robinson versus Jacksonville Shipyards, a case where there was pornography that was displayed throughout the workplace at a shipyard in Jacksonville. And a female who was working at the shipyard filed suit saying that the workplace was hostile, that the extensive pornography made her uncomfortable, and she prevailed in the Middle District. And we talk about famous intellectual property cases. There was one case, Tyne versus Time Warner, that we discussed in this issue, where a former crew member of the Andrea Gale, that was the ship that was the subject of the movie The Perfect Storm, that crew member claimed that Time Warner never had his permission to produce that story, and that he wanted licenses or royalties from that work, from the movie The Perfect Storm. That case is discussed in this edition, and that case was litigated here in the Middle District of Florida. We talked about a case called Playboy Enterprises versus Frena. That was an early Napster case. It was a case where there was an online subscription bulletin where photographs were placed online, and the public went to that subscription bulletin and viewed those photographs, and those photographs were copyrighted. And Playboy Enterprises claimed that the bulletin service was violating its copyrights by allowing those photographs to be posted there. That case was litigated in the Middle District of Florida. And then we have a whole era in this district of criminal cases. And we talk in this edition of the Historical Quarterly about some of those famous criminal cases. Many people may recall the movie Donnie Brasco, and the target of that investigation was Santo Trafficante Jr. Mr. Trafficante Jr. was prosecuted in the Middle District of Florida, and his case was discussed in this edition, and you will actually see a transcription of remarks from the judge who presided over that case. There's another case, Carlos Enrique Later Rivas. Mr. Rivas was tried in 1987 during the cocaine cowboy days when Florida was awash in cocaine and Miami Vice was popular. Mr. Rivas, or Mr. Carlos Enrique Later Rivas, was known to be the highest-ranking member of the Medellin cartel. He was tried and convicted in the Middle District of Florida. He later, after being convicted and sentenced, assisted authorities with their case against Manuel Noriega, who was ultimately tried and convicted in Florida. Then you'll hear about the case of Shalom Weiss. Mr. Weiss was a high-level executive with the National Heritage Life Insurance Company. That life insurance company collapsed, and it was determined that the entire life insurance company was a $450 million fraud. Mr. Weiss has fled after being convicted in absentia. That means he was charged, he was released, he fled, the trial went forward, and he was convicted. And he was apprehended abroad and was brought back and was given a sentence of 845 months in prison, one of the longest sentences given in the country for a case like this, and he is currently serving time, and he was prosecuted here in the Middle District of Florida. There's a criminal case involving Colonel George Strofimov. Mr. Strofimov was convicted of spying for the KGB here in the Middle District of Florida, and he was given a life sentence. Mr. Strofimov today is the highest-ranking military figure convicted of spying in the nation, and he was tried here in the Middle District of Florida. And then there's some recent history cases that are discussed. There's a case of Sammy Al-Arian, who was tried and acquitted of many counts for terrorism after the 9/11 attacks. He ultimately pled guilty to providing funds to entities that turned out to be the Islamic Jihad group. He is currently serving 57 months in prison. In the Middle District of Florida, we have the recent case of Wesley Snipes and Lou Pearlman, two famous people who were tried and convicted here in the Middle District of Florida. So this edition is a combination of big criminal cases and big civil cases, and there have been a substantial number of cases that have been handled by this district, and cases that tell the history of the last 50 years here in Central Florida.
I don't think many people realize how much history is played out in the courts, because you pretty much covered various aspects of American society there, not just one. I think readers are going to get a great deal out of this special issue, and maybe see history different than they have before. Mr. Dellinger, thank you very much for speaking with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining our international audience for this podcast of the Florida Historical Quarterly. The Florida Historical Quarterly is the peer-reviewed scholarly journal of the Florida Historical Society. The Society was founded in 1856 and is the only statewide historical organization in the state of Florida. The Society is headquartered in Cocoa, Florida, and the editorial offices of the journal are in the Department of History at the University of Central Florida. I hope you have enjoyed the Florida Historical Quarterly podcast and that you will consider supporting future scholarship on Florida history by becoming a member of the Florida Historical Society. In recognition of the quincentennial of Ponce de Leon's first visit to Florida in 1513, the FHQ is publishing a series of 6 special issues, each devoted to examining Florida over the previous 5 centuries. We look forward to receiving your feedback on these special issues and other future volumes as well. We also invite researchers to access back issues of the Florida Historical Quarterly on JSTOR. Thank you again for listening to the Florida Historical Quarterly podcast. If you enjoy listening to this interview and know of others who enjoy history, please tell them about the podcast and have them find us on Facebook.